Hi everybody, and today I'm going to be talking about why the PS Vita failed. Now, we both can argue that it could be because everybody's buying iPhones, because um, well, everybody has an iPhone, but actually, if that were the case, then if that was 100% the cases, then I don't think anyone would be buying Switches or I've seen actually one or two people that have like a 3DS. But here's another reason why I do believe that the Vita failed. For one thing, I think it was because Sony completely jumped to things while Nintendo was actually taking one step at a time. You through see through through the years, Nintendo actually started small, and this one was not exactly much of a game system. It had no color, black and white, actually actually gray. But before that was the Game and Watch, and it was something that was really small, and you can only play like one or two games in it. So each one um, had like one or two games already installed in it, but it wasn't really much, and it was probably cheaper to make and cheaper to sell. Now, through the years, Nintendo actually from went one step at a time. So with the original Game Boy, they did a slim, then they added color to it, and then they did advance, and then SP, which that one is where they um, add light to it, and then they did the DS, which that was still a step higher than the Game Boy Advance SP because it pretty much looks like a Game Boy Advance SP on steroids. And the reason why I say that is because if you see the top of the original one, it looks like the top of the Game Boy Advance SP, but it looks like they added more on the sides. Now, now they went from having while they took one step at a time through the years, they went from having this to a console where you can actually play it on the TV and on the go. So it's pretty much Nintendo's version of the Vita, but they worked their way up there, and over the years, people actually adapt to it. Now, now, for those of you that probably disagree, go with me on this. Over the years, Nintendo's handheld systems were probably a lot cheaper to make in the beginning. But after they took one step at a time, yes, I agree. Prices probably went higher, but over the years, people probably were able to afford it while the company was able to afford it. PlayStation, on the other hand, jumped to things, and yes, this was a success, but not compared to the DS. The DS actually sold more than this, but that's because they were probably cheaper to make and cheaper to buy than these. Now, here now here's why I now here's where I think the Vita failed. The PlayStation Vita, I believe, started jumping to the high quality, high graphics, and pretty much it it was like it was like higher advanced than any PlayStation system I've played. Now, those do come at a cost. So when they so the Vita was actually a lot more expensive to make and a lot more expensive to buy as well. So since since the 3DS was actually a bit cheaper, and I'm not talking about the system, I'm talking about like accessories. If you use like a normal SD card, it costs way cheaper than a Vita memory card. You know, when I bought the Vita memory card, like I bought like the biggest one was a 64 gig. It was $150. That in my Vita was actually $200. I did the math, and if I did the math, system, case, 10 game cartridges plus few that I bought from the store. That's 10 games plus the memory card. That little package cost like all of it together, the whole set costed like over half a grand. While I was able while I was able to get a 3DS with a case and a SD card for like over half that price. Now, it probably costed a little more for me, but that's because I got a whole lot more games out of it. So if I had like 10 games from the 3DS or the original DS, it probably costed less than the Vita. So since 3DSs were so since in a way 3DSs were cheaper to make and the Vita was more expensive to make and expensive to sell, no one bought the system. Since no one bought the system, then there then they didn't then Sony didn't really have the money to make very many games. And that's why there's not very much games compared to the 3DS because they didn't have the money for it. Without games, a system is nothing. That's exactly why when I bought the Vita, I was only able to get 10 games out of it, and but then when I switched to a 3DS XL, it was backwards compatible to the original DS, which I think that's why more people bought the 3DS than the Vita because of its backwards compatibility. I actually think it still wouldn't compete with. I actually think that if the Vita was actually backwards compatible to the original PSP games, if it was able to play UMD games, maybe it would have done a little better. It still it would still cost more, but it would probably do a little better. But even though it wouldn't compete with the 3DS, because PSPs didn't really compete with the original DS, but I think the Vita would have done a little better. See, I don't see that is why I don't think iPhones and tablets are 100% the cases when it comes to handhelds not doing so well. It has to. I think some of this I believe has to do with supply and demand. How much they've actually spent on it, and they've took a lot of risks and making it, and they made everything so expensive because of how much they spent on making these things, especially with accessories, and no one and not very many people bought the system, and I actually understand that. Um, and more people bought the 3DS because to it was a bit cheaper to buy and probably cheaper to make. So there is my conclusion of the Vita. Now, don't get me wrong, I loved the Vita when I had it. I mean, I played it all. I played it all day, but my story with that was, um, I couldn't get very many games out of it, so I wanted to try something different, and that was when I got the 3DS. And I'd say the 3DS or the 3DS XL is it's a better choice than the Vita because of its backwards compatibility to the original DS, you can get a whole lot more games out of it, and it's actually cheaper to buy, especially with an SD card. You get an SD card for a 3DS, it'd be a whole lot cheaper than getting an SD card for the Vita. So there's my conclusion on why I think the Vita failed, and I know some of you may agree or disagree. Um, tell me what you think in the comments below on these point of views. And if you don't agree, that's fine. If there's other things with the system that I don't know, feel free to tell me in the comments below. Uh, th- Thank you. Bye.